I'm Insomniac.
I'm Pops.
And this is Shooting the Shit,
a.k.a. Chatting with Pops.
Alright, so this is episode 5 of Shooting the Shit, a.k.a. Chatting with Pops, and for all of you watching this that are going, what the fuck do you mean, episode 5, I've only seen episode 1, well that's because I guess you also missed the part where I said that this is a weekly segment, but for patrons only, so if you're not signed up over there, you didn't see episodes 2, 3, and 4, but they did happen, and they were pretty fantastic, having a lot of fun with this. So, like I said, this is episode 5, this is a public episode, and then the next one that will be public will be episode 9? Yeah, it's nice that I can count, right? So, that's what it is. So today's topic is actually something pretty interesting, because we're both musicians and played live for a long time and still play music and whatnot. And a friend of his said, why don't you discuss the difference in the music scene back when he was in the scene versus when I was in the scene, which was literally up until about 3 years ago.
Shout out to Bill Haas. By the way, Bill, get on YouTube and become a patron.
So there are a lot of similarities, there's a lot of differences, and we have a lot to talk about there. So I think you'll find this one interesting for sure, because even if you're not a musician, even if you're just a fan, everybody's a fan of music to some degree, it's kind of an inside look, a behind the scenes look at the absolutely ridiculous world of the music scene, and from two very different time periods.
Yes.
What time period were you out playing?
Well, I started playing, I mean, I was pretty young when we really got out there and started playing. Yeah, you know, I guess you want to say from the late 70s, mid 70s, all the way through my real glory days was the early 80s, mid 80s.
The wonderful times of coke.
No, it was. A lot of cocaine floating around, a lot of drugs, you know. But, you know, it was a great time. I mean, the 70s, when I started out playing cover music, was just amazing. The things, and still people are covering it today. There's bands that just cover bands, you know, because it was such amazing music, you know, from Led Zeppelin to Rush, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and Jimi Hendrix, and I mean, you name it. I mean, the music scene was amazing when I was a kid. I mean, I grew up in a time when rock and roll was, it was music. I mean, you know, in the 70s, you know, I did a lot of cover music and played a lot of parties and things like that, and I was very young. I mean, I guess I started playing parties and things with my guitar player and guys I played with and stuff. I was probably 12, 13 the first time I was playing at a party, you know, and it was like, wow, this is just it was something.
When I was playing, which was from the time I was about 13 until, like I said, about 3 years ago, which I guess like 2014 or so is when I stopped playing it. In terms of genre, like he's talking about, where that was like the days of real music and real rock. Of course, that stuff still exists today, so that was there. But I was playing rock, hard and alternative rock mostly, but the genres, as opposed to back then, there was just pretty much rock, you know, and there was a few subgenres. By the time I was in, you know, out there playing, the genres were so segmented and all these subgenres that, like, it was hard to even book proper shows, because to try to get with bands that were playing the same type of shit you were playing, everything was super separate. And scene rock, for those of you who remember that bullshit, that was big at that point. So there was just a lot of posing going on and not as much musicianship. So I mean, there's a slight difference there between when he was playing and when I was playing.
The scene then was just tremendous. I mean, like, it was just rock and roll. So we got out there and did it. And then by the time I hit the 80s, I was in an original band. There was I guess it was a 5-piece band, and here we go with the liquor. Every fucking week.
I gotta put it in the coffee.
Right? Yeah. We got to do that because we're talking about music, right? Oh,
or just because liquor's good in coffee.
Yeah, great.
Anyway, continue.
My fungal. No, I don't want any. Right. We started to really write and play our own music, and we had, you know, gotten out there in the music scene, and we opened up for big names, man. There was everything from Joan Jett to opened up for the Ventures one time. That was awesome. At the Dirt Club. Johnny Dirt ran that club. Wild guy, man. Wild times there. And it was like having CBGBs in Bloomfield. No lie. It was that cool a place. And we opened up for...
which I got to play the actual CBGBs right before it closed.
And so did we. That's a funny thing about me.
Except by the time I got to it, as opposed to, I'm imagining when it was in its peak.
Yeah, it was.
When you were playing. By the time I got to it, it was a shell of what it was.
Right.
And I mean, actually, I think the CBGB show was like, as much as it was exciting to play there, it was kind of almost more sad than anything. It felt like rich with like gritty, wonderful music history, but no more. It felt like people were just playing on a stage that greats used to be on.
In that respect, me and my son played at a lot of the same places. There was CBGBs. You played at the Bitter End. I played at the Bitter End.
Played at the Bitter End a lot.
And we got out there and opened up for a lot of big names. Wall of Voodoo, Psychedelic Furs. I mean, we really met a lot of people, and it was wild times. That's all I can say.
Like, he's talking about opening up for, some larger names and stuff, and there's an interesting difference between the scene then and the scene in these recent years. Just was kind of like if the people were local and you were a band locally.
That's right.
They'd let you. They'd let you play. That's huge difference between then and now, because now it doesn't matter who's playing, in your local area. It's all politics now. So it's not just like you're the local band, you're near this club, you want to open for these guys. There's, you got to go through managers and AR reps and all kinds of crazy shit, kiss a lot of ass, sometimes pay money just to be able to open for somebody who's even, a B-level or C-level larger style band. So I played hundreds of shows, and I don't have a bunch of cool stories about big names we opened up for, because no matter how far we got, that was nearly impossible.
Yeah.
So that's a huge difference between back then and now.
Yeah, so in our case, if we were on the billing, we were literally open up for like big names, like clubs like the Meadowbrook and Hitsville and these places in the city like we were talking about. Now, talking about the vibe of the scene back then, when I was out playing original music, it was an amazing time. I also felt it was a shitty time in music. Some of the 80s music was too electronic. I didn't think it was great. But the scene itself was unbelievable. All I could say about the scene was it was absolutely incredible. People like Clem Burke with Blondie, the drummer, would just wander into the Dirt Club and go, hey, I'm gonna sit in, and there was the Smithereens and the Wyos and just amazing bands. People would just wander in, and you'd be going, wow.
And crowds actually showed up to listen to music.
Yeah, I mean, the Dirt Club, sometimes there'd be 10 people there and we'd make $5. And another time be jammed to capacity and maybe we'd make $30 or $40 for a set. But I know a place like Hitsville would get packed and we'd play 20 minutes and make $120. And again...
Which back then was a lot of money.
It was. And the scene was just amazing.
Well, there were a lot of similarities between his period and my period in terms of crowd size varies, of course, from venue to venue and night to night. And pay, of course, always varies. Sometimes you got no pay. Sometimes you're fighting the guy at the door for your pay at the end of the night. Sometimes you get paid a shit ton. You played 4 songs. So that wasn't any different. The difference was back in his day, at least by what I get, because obviously I wasn't there, but by what I get out of the stories, people wanted to go see music. They wanted to go hear music. It wasn't necessarily about the brand of who was playing that night or just going to see one particular band. They wanted to drink and have a good time and listen to live music. Not the case in the last 10 or so years, and believe me, like I said, I've played all over the country, and that's not the way it works.
Back in my time, the scene was also about the club you were going to go to, like the Dirt Club, CBGBs, many of these clubs. And when you got there, you'd see bands and things that you'd otherwise never see, like today. In Rob's era, you would never have seen the bands, like you do now, by just showing up at this club, because that was all part of the scene. The scene for me back in the 80s especially was about the club and the people and the regulars you'd see there. That was all part of the scene, to go to the club.
The venue you were playing at didn't matter for us at all. There were no regulars.
No.
Pretty much it was just, do they have a back line or not? Hopefully not, because their instruments are going to suck. Yeah, like unless you're playing some large venue that the whole world's heard of, like if you're playing at Madison Square Garden or something, then then your friends were excited. But otherwise, they didn't care because people aren't going to music venues anymore. It's sad, but unless they're directly invited or begged, they're just not going to venues anymore. So I mean, yeah, I guess that's cool. Back then, it was about the club and where you were going at.
It was like, where we going Friday or Saturday night? And boy, when I bring up that Dirt Club, that was a happening place. Regulars, we'd gather, and it was all part of the scene, and the music was amazing because of that, because we wanted to be there. Today, you could just sit home and go, oh, let me put on YouTube like we're doing.
I mean, honestly, you could have a show on the lawn that's got the same energy as a show at the bitter end, because it really has nothing to do with the venue anymore.
No, the venue was very important.
I've many a times went to a venue and we're loading our stuff in, and I see a couple of few hundred people in the venue in front of the stage, and we're thinking, this is great. We're gonna play to a ton of people. They were there for the band that was on before us, and when they were done, almost nobody hung around. They would clear out completely. There would be like 10 or 12 stragglers, and then whoever came just to see us. In fact, the whole struggle during my days in the music scene, which again were very recent, were pretty much you brought your crowd, and that was it. And it's loyalty just to whoever they came to see, and that was it. So basically, if you brought 30 people to see you that night, you had maybe 40 people to see you that night. And it doesn't matter if the band before you had 150 people, they weren't sticking around to watch you, unless, that's when, of course, marketing comes in, and we started doing some kind of tricky things to get people to stay and whatnot. And then people become fans if the music's good enough. We had that happen plenty of times, but there was no just go out and see live music. It seemed more like a chore to get people to go. They had to be really into the specific genre, and most of the time, unless you had a big name that already had some buzz, if they didn't know who you were, they weren't even staying to watch.
I ran into funny occasions like he's talking about. I was playing one time at a club called Hitsville in Passaic. It was a great club. And we got up one night, this is a true story, we got up one night to play our set, original music, and there wasn't a lot of people in the place, and we didn't bring a lot that night. It was like a pop thing, we had the gig open, we went and did it. People were hanging around, and we got up and started playing, and it was like we weren't even playing. They weren't there for us, they were there to drink a party, whatever. So you had both things. Sometimes people party, get into your band, and other times like, oh, there's a band playing? I remember we played 2 songs, and I stopped the whole band in the middle of the 3rd song, got up at the mic, and I literally said, what is wrong with you fucking people? What is fucking wrong with you? There's a band playing here. And then I said, fuck it, I'm not playing. True story. And we walked out, and the fact is, it was a decent crowd, and we got paid very well because, it was funny because the owners knew us well and stuff, and I guess they were like, wow, you guys got a point. So we literally walked off. That was one time. Strange things happened. The scene was wild. And then, but it was definitely similar, but it was more likely people were going to hang around in my time, and they saw your band and dug it. And it was fun. It was a party time. It's true. It was different that way. We had such a party time, an element of dancing and partying, having fun, meeting people, that it wasn't like your situation was
not our generation.
Way different, because I went to his gigs.
It just wasn't that way. In fact, the love of the music thing really didn't exist with the scene that I was in. Anywhere we went, basically the people that loved the music the most that weren't our crowd were the other bands, and they would wind up signing up for mailing lists and taking demos and shit like that. The people that were there that weren't musicians, that weren't impressed by the musicianship, that never heard of us before, most of them just weren't paying attention, or they, it was, and I don't get me wrong, it makes me sound really sour about the whole thing. I had a lot of really awesome shows. I played to some really big crowds. I just felt like there wasn't much raw love of music going on in my time of playing it. Right. People weren't there just because they wanted to go out and hear good music. They were there for whatever band begged them to come out that night, and they didn't really give a shit about your band. Let's move on to drugs.
Well, wait. Before drugs, in my time, the look and the dress of the time, the way people dressed and did their hair, the bands, it was just amazing. It was like seeing, like, the Wios were like the Stray Cats. In fact, I think they were better than the Stray Cats. They just had the whole rockabilly look going on, and the clothes we wore was really cool. And the dances and the dancing kind of thing. And that was the thing about, you know, what I played versus what Rob played. We played what worked in the times. You could dance and get people moving and partying, because the 80s just had that sound, that new wave, punk even, but new wave, which is what it was called. That you either had to be part of that scene, or I got news for you, you had to have some real tricky thing if you weren't going to work then. So I'm talking about the scene in my heyday, which is the 80s.
When I was playing, it was mostly scene rock, and that's the only way I can put it, because like scene rock was kind of like a mix of hard rock mixed with a little bit of emo, mixed with a little bit of metal. It had like a little bit of everything, but it was like, you know, the long, greasy, swooshy fucking hair, and the kids with the tight ripped jeans, and the whole... It really wasn't a purist genre at all, no. But, you know, kids seem to try to relate to that. Like, they had a very specific look for scene rock, but the music wasn't very specific. So the types of bands you played with throughout the night kind of varied. You could have bands play back-to-back that really kind of just didn't sound like one another. There was all trace elements of all these different styles of rock that were happening, and it just wasn't very purist.
And in my time, it was we all sounded pretty similar, or at least we were trying to do a new wave, kind of get people moving, or have that type of sound, you know, a hook to it. You know, the bands were pretty similar. You guys was really all over the place. I didn't enjoy his scene, following him around, as opposed to my scene was just, what a time, man. Again, I'm telling you, 80s, I didn't love the 80s so much, but it was some time. And I'm talking about the 80s mostly because that was my real glory days. I wish I could talk more about the 70s, but I was doing more cover stuff. In the 70s, the time in the 70s was just like crazy. Now we'll move on to drugs. The drugs...
I'm pretty sure there's more similarities than differences there.
Yes, I mean the drugs, even moving back from when I started.
Now let's talk specifically though about green room, you know, backstage.
Yeah.
Because drugs, I mean, obviously changed a lot from period to period, but I don't think drugs in the green rooms at venues changed very much.
No.
Lots of drinking and lots of coke.
Yeah, and not in my time, not just coke. Here's what went on. There was Quaaludes, and there was coke.
Quaaludes don't even exist anymore.
And when we get around to talking, I don't know. We get around to talking about bands, I'm going to tell stories that'll blow your mind. But the drugs was unbelievable. Quaaludes, coke were big, real big. And mescaline. Mescaline was a funny little drug. You know, I never got involved in any of the drug scene or much drinking. I drank a little, but it just wasn't for me. Now, the guys I was playing with, another story, some of them. Really, it made a mess of everything. But yeah, that wasn't much different.
I drank a little, and of course there was always, you know, stuff to drink in the green rooms and on stage and stuff like that. But I mean, at every little shit venue from here to, you know, out in the country where I've played, somebody in the green room will offer you coke.
Absolutely.
You know, like, oh yeah, you're from that band that's going on at 7:30, right? You want a line? Like, no. But you know, all over the place. Like, drugs are still definitely a huge part of the scene. They're not a mandatory part of the scene, but they're
They're there.
So that hasn't changed a whole lot. I think like the big sad takeaway or just kind of overall difference between the years, which is about like what, 3 or so decades.
Yeah.
I don't do math very well today. But you know, the big takeaway and difference, I think, the whole just gritty, raw rock scene, and that's all kind of the same. It always stays the same. The venue names just change a little bit.
Crazy
The
people.
big difference is the involvement. You know, the fan involvement, where back then, you know, everything wasn't so short attention span and so instant gratification. You would actually, you know, put in the time to listen to a song or two when the next band comes up to see what you like, as opposed to, like I said, I think basically all the years that I played, starting in around 2000, 2001, being on stages through 2013, nobody really gave a shit. And the few years that you did catch, that was a lucky thing, or you had to kind of, you know, really schmooze people beforehand to stay and watch the set, and then they liked it. But generally, it was just like, I'm here for this band, you know, and it was to the extent that most venues would keep tallies of what band you were there for. So you kind of just wound up, you know, almost locked into that, here's what time this band's playing, and you watch that band, and then you left.
Yeah.
So there wasn't much love for music at that point.
I don't know, where is music today? I don't know. I mean, our music...
It's still there, but what's happening is, see, back then, there was always crowds, but the bigger the venue, the bigger the crowd. Now it's a great divide where, from mid-sized venues like Starland Ballroom or Hammerstein or something like that,
right.
Up through, of course, the big places, you're getting sellout crowds. And there is no middle ground really anymore where you see, crowds of 50 to 100 or a couple of hundred, in a small venue just enjoying music. Right. Now you have the shows that I was talking about, which are the bigger shows, B and C list kind of bands up through top names. And all the ones that are struggling at the bottom trying to get somewhere, the scene is almost disintegrated to the point where there aren't even live venues are becoming rare. All ages venues almost don't exist anymore,
right,
at least
right.
in the New York, New Jersey area. And, for up and coming bands, you're not going to go to a local venue and catch people trying to find unsigned, new, surprise talent. That just doesn't happen anymore. So it's almost like, kind of like when you're, a lot of people complain these days about the job market, about how everybody wants 5 years of experience, but they won't hire you in the first place. Well, you can't seem to catch a crowd anywhere these days in the music scene without having a buzz behind you, but you can't get anybody to watch you to catch that buzz in the first place. And everything shifted these days to digital. You have to do pretty much all your work and all your you got to do all your legwork online now and catch a buzz there before you even hit a stage. That's how it works now.
And back in my time, the scene was, you better get up there and play your ass off because some promoter, some record guy, somebody was going to be standing around, and that's how it worked.
That doesn't exist anymore. And there are no scouts. There are no talent scouts. There are no people out there looking for bands. And I guess to a degree, kind of backtracking to what I said a minute ago, I guess they don't have to, because everybody's online. So now, if somebody actually wanted to scout a band, they could just go online and listen to what they want to do. And honestly, I don't even think they're listening to anything. They look at the pictures and they look at the numbers. If it looks like a band is picking up some following and has a buzz behind them, but they don't even really give a shit what the music sounds like.
That was always
sell the money.
That was always, even back in my time, somewhat what you're saying there.
There was no internet back then.
No.
I'm talking about now. You don't have to go out and see for yourself, what the show is like and what the following's like. You just click through endless bands at your desk. But
the buzz would get around. It was different. The buzz would get around. It's like, oh, this guy would show up and see that band. That's about all I have to say about my scene. I mean, it was a good time,
The music was great. I loved every second of playing, but the scene was always disappointing to me. And it's worse now than it was 4 years ago. So, man, I'm almost glad that I'm not in it at this point. But yeah, so that's the current state of the music scene and the specific time that I was in it versus when he was in it. I thought this was a pretty productive topic. It brings back a lot of memories. And somebody actually did suggest that we actually talk about our history of bands that we've been in. That is a longer topic. It's something that we could
really
that
cool.
There's a lot more specifics to that we're going to get to. But that's a patron-picked topic, which means you're not going to see it for all of you that are watching this that aren't patrons. So if you want to see that topic when it comes up, plus all the we do this every single week.
Every week.
You're going to want to go to the link at the top of the video description, sign up at that patron page, and then you will get this segment every week because we're having a lot of fun with this. The feedback's been great. So yeah, make sure you do that so you're not missing these weekly episodes. Otherwise, we'll see you in a month.
Yeah, we're out. See you later.
There we go.